A man dies in his world of origin and reincarnates as a sword in a fantasy world where he's the teacher to a young beastkin girl. A flashback depicting how the sword died is shown and how he reacts to not only being reincarnated in an alternate world, but as a sword mounted onto a pedestal. For a brief time, a voice inside the sword's head informs him that he's in for one hell of a time and then leaves. Despite wanting more answers, the sword chalks the voice to be a hallucination and realizes that if he's in an isekai story, he'd have cheat skills. Wasting no time, he pulls out his menu to see his name and learns he's an intelligent weapon. Furthermore, the sword complements his skills and abilities. He then notes his design looks like a sword you'd find toward the end of an RPG. At that moment, a small pack of goblins tries to draw him out of his pedestal. Provoked by the goblins, the sword uses his telekinesis skill to slay a couple of them immediately. In doing this, the sword manages to slice a crystal inside one of the goblins, allowing him to absorb its power unknowingly. Once the goblin pack was finished off completely, the sword opened up his menu again to see the new things in his stats menu, noticing that he's accumulated 3 100s crystals so far and has skill slots with some new skills after he slayed the goblins. Realizing that he can absorb skills from his defeated enemies, the sword hears a feminine voice notifying him that he has 10 skill slots available and then asks if he'd like to equip any. Before doing that, the sword stabs the corpse of a goblin and absorbs its crystal, thereby absorbing its 2 skills. Afterward, the sword uses his digging skill to bury the goblin pack's corpses and resets himself back into his sword mount. Looking forward to absorbing more crystals and gaining new skills, the sword also hopes that he'd one day get a worthy master to wield him. Elsewhere, a young black cat girl works with a group of slaves under the orders of their slave trader master, and internally notes her desire to become stronger. Returning to the sword, he uses his telekinesis to fly in the air for 3 minutes periodically as his MP runs out within that time. The sword encounters an air floater, which he tries to kill instantly, but the monster constricts him with its tentacles and drains his MP. Desiring that skill for his own, the sword slices through the air floater's tentacles and immediately slays the monster, thereby absorbing its crystal. Once the sword absorbs 3 new skills, he notices one of them is called Float. This skill, combined with his telekinesis, allows him to fly for 5 times longer, and he uses it to slay a monster centipede. By doing this, the sword is notified that his abilities have evolved and that he's received 10 evolution points. The sword uses 5 skill points to gain improved MP 1 and the other 5 for improved attack 1. Although elated that he's gained 2 new skills, the sword notes his forlorn over not having a user to wield him. That evening, the sword locates a cave that acts as a goblin nest and slays the ones outside and most of the ones inside, gaining new skills in the process. In the deepest part of the cave, the sword, using stealth, locates the Goblin King surrounded by goblins. Using his telekinesis catapult attack, the sword instantly kills the Goblin King and proceeds to kill the rest of the goblins. Once that was settled, the sword learns that his sword mastery is up to level 3. Elated again that his wielder would be delighted to have such an impressive skill set. Meanwhile, the black cat girl protects another slave from a beating by one of their overseers and is ordered to stand down. Because of her insubordination, she's scolded and isn't allowed any dinner that night. The following morning, the black cat girl tries to retaliate against her overseer again, only to be ordered down to the ground by the overseer. Later, she and the other slaves ride a wagon through a forest where the black cat girl chants that she'll get stronger and evolve. The sword back on his pedestal reflects how the further he's away from the location, the stronger types of monsters he encounters. The locations are divided into areas, the highest being 5, and thus far, he's been able to handle all of the monsters in Area 4. With enough confidence, the sword challenges the Area 5 boss, a gluttonous slime, and defeats it by combing his telekinesis catapult and wind shooter skills he aptly calls Heavenly Slash. By accomplishing this, the sword receives 30 EP and some new skills, including Insta Region 1. It's a skill that allows him to instantly regenerate himself at the cost of a ton of MP. The sword then tries out the pocket dimension, which instantly stores the gluttonous slime's corpse. Eventually, the sword would face off against the eastern boss, the doppelsnake, and would gain its doppelganger ability, which unimpressed him. He'd then face off against the Area 5's northern boss, a blast turtle, and tries out his split thinking skill and uses it to improve his earth magic. By doing this, he defeats the blast turtle with an earth wall and heavenly slash and gains 2 new abilities. The next day, the sword faces off against the western boss of Area 5, Tyrant Saber-Tooth. By spending 15 EP, the sword upgrades its superior Poison Fang to Demonic Poison Fang and exploits its poison weakness against it. After defeating the monster, the sword evolves again, gaining new stats. Longing to face off against new stronger monsters, the sword heads into the forest beyond Area 5. When the sword plants himself into the ground, he learns that his MP was being absorbed by it and becomes stuck there. During his month-long stay there, he cries out for someone to rescue him, not caring what race they belong to, and out of desperation, maxes out his cooking and fire skills. Furthermore, he levels up his wielder stats boost to level 2. Amid this, it starts to rain, and the sword goes on a morose soliloquy about his current situation. Meanwhile, a twin-headed bear attacked the wagon the black cat girl and the slaves rode on. It sequentially destroys the wagon and kills some of the slaves as well as an overseer. This grants the black cat girl's freedom, and while wielding a stick, attacks the monster, but is blown away by its awesome power. Desiring more power, the sword calls out to the black cat, who finds him and uses him to defeat the twin-headed bear. After this, the slave trader tries to get the black cat to relinquish the sword, but he angrily kills the trader for his abuse and burns the contract that was connected to the black cat's collar, causing it to fall off, setting her free. The black cat then agrees to become the sword's wielder to evolve, as no black cat has ever managed to evolve. Moved by the black cat's story, the sword agrees to train and help her achieve her goal. The black cat girl then introduces herself as Fran, and because the sword doesn't have a name, Fran calls him teacher, mainly due to his promise to make her stronger. In the present, Fran sleeps next to teacher as they ride on a wagon to a city surrounded by a stone wall, where a horde of goblins plan to invade it. Teacher gives a narration about Fran's background and her desire to evolve, even though those of the Black Cat tribe have never been able to evolve. After finishing a pack of goblins off, Fran uses water magic to clean herself off, and then teacher of the goblin bloodstains. Fran then hears something and rushes to the scene despite teacher's plea to learn what the problem is. Skipping over to a merchant wagon surrounded by a large group of goblins, an adventurer named Randell struggles to protect the wagon with the merchant inside it. Arriving at the scene, Fran briskly eliminates the goblins as the lead goblin flees. Thankful for Fran's help, Randell asks if she'd like a ride to Alessa. Teacher considers the offer a way for Fran to help him protect the wagon until they reach the destination. However, beyond that, he believes Randell to be a good guy overall and has Fran accept the offer. En route to their destination, Randell explains to Fran the rise in monster encounters within the Great Wolf Plain. Apparently, a turf war occurred there, causing weaker monsters like goblins to take refuge by busy roads. Hearing this makes teacher conclude that his antics within the area caused recent trouble. Fran then asks if Randell knows about a plain sword implanted within the area. However, Randell does not, much to teacher's dismay. Randell then asks if Fran is a G-ranked adventurer, which perplexes her and teacher. Hence Randell explains the monster ranking system to her and those who hunt monsters, adventurers. An explanation of adventurers is then given by Randell, who names a couple of famous ones. Desiring to become an adventurer herself, Randell explains that Fran will have to register at the Adventurers Guild, where she can sell her monster materials. Elsewhere, the goblin leader that fled after Fran's arrival returns to its base, where a goblin shaman summons various species of goblins and, in the process, starts to mutate. Back to Fran's side, the wagon arrives in Alessa, and as Fran heads to the Adventurers Guild, Teacher casts Identify on the weapons used by the adventurers. To his astonishment, all the weapons were much stronger than he was, and becomes morose. Fran then cheers Teacher up by praising him, which lightens up his spirits, and they continue forward to the Adventurers Guild. At the guild, the receptionist Nell struggles to keep up the facade of a smiling receptionist while dealing with the boorish behavior of the adventurers there. Fran then approaches Nell and asks to register as an adventurer. Internally, Nell believes Fran to be unfit to be an adventurer, but still allows her to take the mock fight exam. Led to an arena, where the examiner Donadrand introduces himself to Fran with a loud, boisterous voice, while using his intimidation skill. Casting Identify on Donadrand, Teacher is shocked by how strong Donadrand is as the ogre prepares himself for the fight ahead. At the start of the fight, Fran has trouble defending herself against Donadrand's attacks, so Teacher casts support buffs on her, making her STR and Eggle temporarily increase. With the buffs and the combination of earth and fire magic, Fran finishes the fight off with a Dragon Fang attack. By defeating Donadrand, Fran passes the exam. Afterward, Fran, accompanied by Donadrand, meets with the guild master Klimt in his office. Klimt tries to learn from Fran, where she learned her sword skills and spells, but following Teacher's advice, refuses to answer. Understanding, Klimt tries to use Identify on Fran. However, it's negated due to Teacher's Identify protection. Curious to know if she failed, Klimt assures Fran that she has passed as the spirits are calm. Teacher then casts Identify on Klimt and learns his impressive stats and skills. Just then, Nell enters the room and informs him that everything is in order, and Klimt allows Fran to be issued her guild card. In a room where stone-carved faces make up the wall, a large crystal sits upon a pedestal in the center of the room. Fran records her mana signature on the crystal, and then chooses her class as Spellsword. Once that is settled, Nell hands Fran her guild card, and back at the receptionist's desk, Fran turns in some of her monster materials to earn herself a profit of 195k gold. As Fran tries to leave, a quartet of adventurers try and extort money from Fran, but Nell intervenes and disparages the group. One of the members tries to attack Nell, but Fran saves her, and Teacher suggests they take the fight outside. However, the adventurers block the way. One of the adventurers disparages Fran as being from the Black Cat tribe, which triggers her and makes her slice off the adventurer's feet. She then takes out the remaining adventurers with oscillation. Nell refuses to heal the leader until he pays a large fine. Once that was done with, Fran leaves the guild, but a dwarf uses God Sight on Teacher to deduce that he's an intelligence weapon. As Fran with Teacher on her back explore the stalls around Alessa seeking equipment, they're approached by Garrus, who suggests they visit his shop for some. Teacher casts Identify on Garrus to learn his name, stats, and skills, and is impressed by them. Following Teacher's advice, Fran is guided by Garrus to his shop. On their way to the shop, two men chastise Fran and Envy for being allowed to do business with Garrus, but he reveals they plan to resell his gear and refuses to do business with such men. A curious Fran then asks Garrus why he'd refuse to do business with the two scornful men and yet do it with her. Garrus then claims he was impressed with how she handled the men in the guild and would happily conduct business with her. In Garrus' shop, Fran tries on the equipment that Garrus offers her, and Teacher was impressed by their stats. Despite his continuous self-consciousness over how the swords in the city are more robust than he is, Garrus then reveals that he knows Teacher is actually an intelligent weapon. Alerted by this, Fran takes a side step backward as Teacher tries to deduce how Garrus was privy to his identity. Garrus then laughs and reveals that he has an extra skill called God Eyes that allows him to see past identity protection. Using his God Eyes again, Garrus appraises Teacher and notes that his skills are far more impressive than the others he's seen, which causes Teacher to blurt something out. Garrus picks up on this, and Teacher scornfully curses, But Garrus assures teacher that he merely wishes to have a chat as an intrigued blacksmith. After seeing what teacher was, Garrus notes that Fran doesn't have to have another sword. However, teacher points out that one of Garrus' swords is stronger than him. To that point, Garrus notes that although it has higher ATK power, he then mentions that teacher probably doesn't know about mana conductivity. To demonstrate the difference between the two, Garrus retrieves the sword with 450 ATK from the wall and asks that Fran unravel teacher, endow him with 100 mana points, and attack the sword. Fran does so, and the 450 ATK sword breaks with a single swipe. Garrus then reveals that teacher's mana conductivity was A, meaning he has 200% mana efficiency, and should be able to charge up to 1k mana without any trouble. Teacher deduces that his attack power would be over 2k if he uses a max of 1k mana, and Garrus praises him as one of the most impressive enchanted swords. Hearing this causes both to have a bonding moment that irks Garrus, who then inquires who originally forged teacher. However, teacher has no clue who may have forged him and asks if Garrus God I could elaborate. On the other hand, Garrus details that someone of Garrus' smithing capability couldn't forge him. However, he notes that perhaps a godsmith could. Garrus then details the history of a godsmith and how they can forge sword called divine swords, of which teacher is not one. Furthermore, Garrus explains that the only divine swords he's ever seen was called igneous. Thankful for what Garrus has told him thus far, teacher requests that Garrus create a sheath for him with the monster material collected. Unloading his collection of monster material onto the flustered Garrus informs teacher that the material provided come from DC-ranked monsters and offers to create it for free. Told by Garrus that it'll take 3 days for the sheath and a month for him to complete the armor, Fran and teacher leave Garrus' shop. While walking the streets of Alessa, teacher asks if Fran needs panties, to which she informs him that they're unnecessary. A lady admonishes that notion and insists they visit her shop. Inside the place, the shopkeeper shows Fran an assortment of panties to choose from as well as dresses. Following the advice of the shopkeeper, Fran and teacher head to the general store owned by a towering man called Rufus. After teacher uses Identify on Rufus, it's learned that his STR is 150, and Fran asks him if he's an adventurer. Whereas Rufus claims he retired and opened up the shop 3 years ago they're in now. Hence, Fran purchases a bunch of cooking supplies from the shop, and after they find an inn to stay at for the night, teacher makes fried chicken for Fran. Once Fran finished her dinner and was dressed in her pajamas, teacher allocated his ep to healing magic before they went to bed, to be better prepared for the battles ahead of them. Unbeknownst to them, a horde of goblins emerged from a cave. The following day, Fran and teacher find some healgrass in a local forest used as an ingredient in potions. They then find a fruit used to cure poison, and then some stamina shrooms, which are good for cooking. Because they were G-ranked adventurers, tasks like herb collecting were common, as were subjugating monsters such as a few goblins. Fran then hears the voices of adventurers in trouble and heads to their location and finds the adventurers Lily, Kroll, and Eustace surrounded by 13 goblins. Arriving at the scene, teacher spots that some of the goblins are hobgoblins. Hence Fran decides to rush in and assist the adventurers and defeats 3 of them with a fire spell. To prevent another unintentional bonfire that Fran created in the forest, teacher advises that she use earth magic instead. So both Fran and teacher, respectively, cast Stone Arrow and Stone Bullet against the goblins, taking out a few of them in the first volley. Fran then defeats a couple of the goblins with Double Slash, and teacher uses Stone Bullet against one, allowing Fran to level up to 4. She then finishes all of the goblins with teacher's Stone Bullet and Heavy Slash. Once that was done, Fran approached the adventurers and cast Circle Healing on them and, as her reward, agreed to take the hobgoblin materials. When Eustace mentions the appearance of hobgoblins signals a goblin stampede, an ignorant Fran and teacher learn what it is from the adventurers. After the explanation, a single goblin signals its comrades, and teacher takes it out with a stone bullet. With more goblins on the way, Fran has the adventurers return to Alessa to warn them about the upcoming goblin stampede as she deals with the incoming goblins. In doing so, Fran levels up to 8, and despite being surrounded and outnumbered by the goblins, she refuses to give in to them all. Teacher realizes the inadequacy in their strength. However, although Fran acknowledges they're weak, she wants to become stronger by mastering Teacher better. Just then, 2 goblins attack them, and Fran kills them with a single slash. Surrounded by more goblins, Fran prepares to attack them while vowing to become stronger. As Fran does, Teacher realizes that his overprotection was, in turn, a way of him not wanting to get hurt. Wanting to match Fran's determination, Teacher resolves to help Fran the best he can to assist her. From there on out, Fran uses Teacher to slay goblins until dusk. By accomplishing this, Fran levels up to 12. That night, Fran and Teacher visit Garrus's shop, and Garrus comments on how worn-out looking Fran is and learns that she slew over 100 goblins. Teacher then asks Garrus if he can fix up Fran's armor and notes that 2 days from then, Fran will take on her first dungeon. The next day, Fran locates the goblin hideout dungeon, but is forbidden to enter by Teacher, who suggests they collect the goblin crystals from their corpses. They're soon approached by Krull, Lily, Eustace, and a couple of other adventurers. Fran points out the goblin hideout to the group, and a dwarven adventurer claims that the hideout didn't exist a month ago and believes it to be a recently formed dungeon. Krull suggests Fran return to Alessa and inform the guild master about the dungeon while his group watches over the dungeon. Fran agrees to do it, and when she does, Donadron demands to know how many goblins she slew. But Fran's answer is too vague. Klimt then asks if Fran could answer the question more tangibly. So with Teacher's help, she answers she slew about 130 goblins, 20 of which were high tier. Donadron believes that such a number would mean that it's a goblin stampede. Klimt opines the situation's circumstances and is disconcerted that it's now considered a dungeon rather than a hideout. In light of this news, Klimt promotes Fran to F rank. Later, Fran relays the news to Garrus, who repairs her armor with the help of 4 mana crystals on a table. Teacher notes how impressed he was by the restoration spell that Garrus cast, and he explains the properties of mana crystals and that the skill he used was of an arcane blacksmith. Curious to know the cost, Garrus explains to Teacher that it had cost 10k gold, but since the crystals lose their effectiveness over time, the subsequent repair would cost 30k gold. Fran then asks about dungeons, and Garrus thoroughly explains the dungeons, cores, and masters. Once Fran is all set and ready to leave after putting on her armor, Garrus tells Teacher the custom-made scabbard he requested will be ready the next day. Back at the inn, Teacher checks Fran's stats and learns she earned herself a new title, Goblin Killer. Fran then insists that they take a bath together, and despite Teacher's protests, they do. After Fran washes herself off, she proceeds to clean Teacher until Nell, accompanied by 2 other women, stops Fran and notes how bringing her sword into the bathing area is terrible etiquette. The appearance of Nell shocks Teacher, and later they enjoy a meal with her. Nell vents to Fran about her disapproval of the Knights Brigade's refusal to assist in the goblin hunt, making the adventurers handle the entire situation. She then mentions that the Knight's lieutenant, a nobleman named Alsand, hates adventurers and is the one who turned down the request for assistance for the upcoming goblin quest. Nell then claims that she wishes Amanda was there to help and goes on to explain her full name and title, but is unable to help due to taking on another quest in the Great Wolf Plains. Noting that the god of chaos is doing its job, Fran asks Nell about the gods, and she elaborates on them and reveals that the god of chaos is a woman. Fran then asks if there was a god of war, and Fran reveals that there was one. However, it fell from grace due to becoming addicted to power. After this, the former god tried to subjugate the other gods, but failed and was defeated, with several of his severed parts spread and sealed across the land. The parts that weren't sealed transformed into monsters like goblins or orcs. Teacher finds the information to be insightful, but Fran's head can't handle the influx of information that she received. Hence, Teacher returns Fran to her room and allows her to sleep for the rest of the night. The following day, Fran and Teacher visit Gareth's shop, giving them the custom scabbard that Teacher requested. Wasting no time, Teacher gets right into the sheath and is exhilarated by it. Gareth then explains the unique feature of the sheath that allows it to open vertically from a switch on its bottom. Afterward, Fran and Teacher join up with the adventurers tasked with the Goblin Dungeon subjugation led by Donadrand, who reviews the objective tasks of the mission. Amid this, a swarm of goblins exit out of the dungeon. The ambush's abruptness causes the adventurers to separate into smaller groups, which Teacher believes was the goblins' plan. Fran then rescues an adventurer at the mercy of a hobgoblin, and to avoid drawing attention by collecting crystals, Fran decides to head inside the cave. Before reaching her destination, Fran uses Air Leap to gain an aerial advantage, and then casts Tri-Explosion to kill multiple goblins at once. She then uses Sonic Wave to kill multiple ones, and they follow up with Flare Blast. With a clear pathway, Fran and Teacher head inside the cave, where deep inside it, the Dungeon Master gloats about how the ambush he orchestrated has the humans in a tizzy. As the Dungeon Master laughs, a shadowy figure floats beside him. Fran-wielding Teacher rushes into the dungeon as Donadrand and the other adventurers follow suit while slaying the goblins that block their way. Teacher advises Fran to be prudent and to use the Feather of Return if the fights ahead becomes too burdensome. Following Teacher's directions, Fran collects the crystals from select goblins and their corpses while the rest are left for the adventurers to handle. Soon, they find an opening with a pathway leading to the second floor. Stabbing Teacher into the ground, Teacher simultaneously uses echolocation, tremor sense, sense presence, and thermal vision to scout ahead. Detecting two hobgoblin archers ahead, Fran and Teacher immediately confront the goblins, making them flee. However, this allows them to follow the goblins back to their king and queen. Meanwhile, Donadrand and the adventurers finish off the goblins left behind by Fran, and she's talked about how amazing feats thus far. Returning to Fran's side, she locates the king and queen accompanied by a large pack of goblins. Admonishing Fran from charging forward, Teacher suggests they thin out the goblin numbers first with spells and then deal with the king and queen. However, this plan backfires after Teacher accidentally kills the king and queen, much to Fran's disappointment. Continuing forward, it's speculated that neither the Goblin King nor Queen wasn't the Dungeon Master. At the end of the pathway, they reach a doorway, where behind it, they're ambushed by swarms of army beetles, which some have new skills for them to gain. After 30 minutes of slaying the monsters, little to no progress is had in their endeavor. Teacher then sees an army beetle leader and realizes it summoned more beetles as Fran killed them. Noting his interest in the army beetle's summon minion skill, Teacher asks about Fran's condition, to which she replies she's all right. With that, Teacher casts Tri-Explosion, eliminating the army beetles and leaving the leader vulnerable enough to be slain by Fran. After gaining a summon minion skill and her wing magic leveling up to 7, Fran finds another door. Behind it, a potent magical aura could be felt. Before entering through it, Teacher casts Resist All, Boost Sense, Boost Physical, to raise her stats temporarily. Finally, Regeneration is cast in case Fran sustains any wounds. Teacher also promises Fran that when they complete the quest, he'll prepare his one-hash meal, curry, and it makes Fran ecstatic. Entering through the door, Fran and Teacher are greeted by a big-winged demon. In Alessa, Nell visits Klimt in his office to inquire about Donadrand and Fran's dungeon subjugation quest. Klimt alleviates any of Nell's concerns, noting that strong monsters shouldn't inhabit the newly formed dungeon. Donadrand's group cannot pass through the second floor's first door within the dungeon. Over to Fran's side, Teacher casts Identify on the creature and learns it's a greater demon with powerful skills. One of those skills, Skill Taker, concerned Teacher, and he informed Fran about what he heard from Randell about greater demons. A rare type of goblin orders the demon to deal with Fran and chastises her for killing his goblin minions. Rebelling against his master, The greater demon tells the goblin to shut up or die as he handles Fran. Endowing himself with 500 MP, Teacher and Fran face off against the greater demon, who wields his own sword. Amid their fight, the greater demon held a great advantage over Fran, who managed to slice off Fran's hands. Panic-stricken, Teacher casts Firewall to protect Fran from further damage and reattaches Fran's hands with greater heal. The greater demon then tries to ambush Fran using his dark magic, which Teacher deduces he's teleporting via shadow magic, using Fran's shadow as a teleportation catalyst. Launching a counterattack against the greater demon, Fran manages to land a hit, but her opponent retaliates with a powerful spell. Despite Teacher's advice to use the Feather of Return when a chance arises, Fran is determined to win. Acknowledging that Fran's swordsmanship and agility were superior to his, the greater demon uses his skill taker ability to steal them from Fran. Supposedly stealing Fran's skills, the greater demon attacks Fran, only to have the left side of his mouth sliced open by her. Teacher realizes that the greater demon was unaware that he shared his skills with Fran. Hoping to assist the greater demon, the dungeon master summons a horde of goblins, but they're instantly destroyed by the demon's black bomb spell. Warning the dungeon master not to interfere again, or his limbs will be torn off, the greater demon then casts Darkness Thunderbolt against Fran. Within the upper parts of the dungeon, Donadron's group tries to break down the door, leading to the deeper level where Fran was. Returning to Fran's side, Teacher suggests that they use the Feather of Return to escape. However, Fran refuses, noting the consequences if they do. Dodging the demon's darkness spears, Teacher agrees to give Fran all the power she'll need as she deftly dodges the demon's darkness blaster attacks. Assessing the situation, Teacher cogitates on a possible weakness as Fran now dodges black bombs followed by another darkness blaster and darkness thunderbolt. During these attacks, Teacher notices that the demon purposely avoids the dungeon master. So to test a theory, Teacher has Fran cast Fire Arrow at the dungeon master, causing the demon to block the attack with his body. It's then recalled what Donadron once said about what happens to a dungeon once its master is killed. Hence, Fran and Teacher duo cast multiple fire spells against the demon, who negates the spells with a barrier. With their MP going to run out, Teacher proposes a gamble, and after the demon casts another Darkness Thunderbolt, Teacher casts Mana Sense. It allows Teacher to deduce it takes 3 seconds for the demon to regen its MP after a big spell. Hence, Teacher tells Fran to cast a wind spell to fling him toward the dungeon master. Fran does so and creates a decoy with some fire spells. However, the demon was privy to their plans and attacked Teacher with a darkness blaster. But this act was a decoy as Teacher redirects himself toward the demon to stab him in his crystal. Using nearly all of his MP, Teacher defeats the demon, only to end up in a broken state, leaving Fran devastated. At that moment, Teacher starts to regenerate thanks to the demon's crystal and his MP regen skill. Exploiting Fran emotionally cradling Teacher, the dungeon master tries to use its remaining MP to summon another powerful demon, but Fran stops him before he does. She also slices off his hand, which had a sacrificial armband that would allow him to revive after he dies, and stores it away for herself. After this, the dungeon master dies, and the cave transforms into an ivory brick room. Donadron and his party then arrive at the scene, and Donadron praises Fran for her accomplishment, but then disciplines her for running ahead without them. Afterward, while the dungeon subjugation party returns to Alessa, Teacher informs Fran that she's leveled up to 25 and has both new skills and impressive stats to boot. Teacher was also impressed by his own new stats and skills as well. However, when he asked how they should spend his evolution points, he was shocked to see that Fran was upset about how he was so giddy about skills. She had the brunt end of a lecture by Donadron. To raise Fran's opinion of him again, Teacher reminds Fran that he promised to make her some curry after they accomplished the task. Hearing this makes Fran elated, and they change the subject to what skills they'll invest in, which is decided to be sword mastery and arts. Once the points are allocated to max out both of the skills, Fran learns blade arts, mastery, and elemental. The remaining points they use on skill taker and max it out. That night, Fran returns to the Adventurers Guild, where Klimt greets and congratulates her for her recent accomplishment within the dungeon. On the other hand, Klimt asks Fran what happened to the demon's crystal, and Fran answers that it broke when she slew it. Although hesitant, Klimt believes Fran, noting there was no disturbance from the fairies. A homely man in armor barges into the room and claims that Fran was lying. The pompous and pretentious knight who barged into Klimt's office and confronted Fran introduced himself as August Alsand, lieutenant of the Alessa Knights Brigade, who has gross habits. Fran and teacher recall hearing August's name from Nell before, and August then gloats about having a skill that detects lies. Teacher casts Identify on August and gets a vocal description of his special skill essence of falsehood. Its description makes teacher believe that August exploits his ability to his corrupt whims. Despite August's plea to handle Fran for lying to him, Klimt formally rejects it, noting Fran's accomplishment by slaying a greater demon. Furthermore, August's demand to take the monster's crystals and materials is rejected too, citing how his knights didn't partake in the dungeon subjugation. Although August argues the provided information was vague and disparaged the adventurers there, Klimt rebukes August's comments and claims. He also opines how strange it was that Captain Urs rejected his request for assistance with the subjugation and believed that August decided for him. As the argument continues between Klimt and August, Fran tries to mediate the situation by offering her goblin materials, which is swiped away by the disgusted August. Motivated by rage, Fran suggests stabbing August, but is stopped by teacher, who suggests giving a test run of their newly acquired skill taker on August. Fran agrees, and they steal August's essence of falsehood along with noble etiquette. Now unable to detect lies and act appropriately, August leaves the office as Nell enters. Klimt apologizes for August's rude display and explains his distasteful backstory. After this, Klimt announces to Fran that she's been promoted to D rank. An elated Fran thanks Klimt with a polite curtsy stemming from her noble etiquette skill. Later, Fran formally receives her new rank and rewards from Nell at the receptionist desk. She's then congratulated by the dwarf adventurer Levant and the other adventurers there. For their help and contributions toward the dungeon subjugation quest, Fran treats them all to drinks as thanks. Following their celebration at the guild, Fran falls asleep in her room while sleep talking about curry teacher promised to make for her. Amused by the sleepy request, teacher tucks her in and promises to make her some curry in the morning. Teacher is shown dreaming involving 3 goddesses embathed in light who speak to him and display his sword body. Awakening from his dream, teacher realizes that he doesn't dream anymore and finds it strange he did. Soon, teacher teaches Fran how to cook by a riverbank using the ingredients purchased from Rufus' shop. They first make some hamburger steaks and put the finished ones into the pocket dimension. Then they make the main dish, curry, together, and the end result overjoyed Fran. A week passes by, and in that time, Fran takes on various guild quests until her armor is completed by Garrus. On one late afternoon, Fran learns from the Alessa gatekeeper about Viscount Alsand, or the ignoble knight August was looking for Fran. The gatekeeper warns Fran to keep an eye out for any trouble she may encounter involving him, and Fran thanks him for the warning. While walking through the town streets, teacher notifies Fran they're being tailed. Hence, Fran leads the followers to an inconspicuous area, where one of the people reveals themselves to be the now sloven August, who Fran doesn't recognize or remember. Upset by this, August calls out his hired assassin Jurin, a blue cat, the weaker subversion of Fran's black cat heritage. He had hired him to kill Fran as revenge for ruining him. Jurin, an assassin of the Blue Cat clan who was hired by August, disturbs Fran, making her draw teacher from his sheath. Ignorant of the history behind the Blue Cat clan, Fran explains the horrific backstory they have against her Black Cat clan. Gloating Jurin's credentials, August orders him to deal with Fran and leaves for a safe distance. Fran's fight against Jurin begins with him walking behind her and whispering if she's afraid of him. In Fran's brief moment of hesitation, Jurin tries to attack her, but Teacher alerts Fran so she can defend herself against the attack. Teacher learns that Jurin's sword was better than the greater demons, and Fran confesses that blue cats hunted Fran and her parents. Gaining the upper hand against Fran, Jurin recounts a time when he tortured a black cat mother and daughter. Becoming dispirited, Fran is reminded by Teacher about her ultimate goal to evolve and compares Jurin as inferior compared to the greater demon they had faced. Overcoming her fear, Fran slices off Jurin's sword hand after learning the number of black cats he's slain. She then slices off Jurin's limbs and finishes him off by slicing the upper part of his head. Before Fran could deal with the frantically distraught August, a water spirit sent by Klimt stops and summons her back to his office. There, Klimt reveals that August's father, Count Olmes, had put out a warrant for his arrest regarding a family scandal. However, thanks to Fran handling the situation, Klimt would handle August from there on out. Although uninterested in the details, Fran asked if she would be paid for her work, and Klimt confirmed it. Before Fran can leave Klimt's office to claim her reward, she bumps into a busty elf. Apologetic at first, the elf then embraces Fran demanding she addresses her as Mommy. As Fran struggles to be released by the elf's embrace, Klimt asks the elf named Amanda to knock it off. Teacher casts Identify on Amanda and learns her stats well reflect her rank. Amanda then details that she's heard stories surrounding Fran from the guild lobby. Right before Fran leaves the office, Amanda claims they'll talk again, but Fran rejects the comment. After Fran's first encounter with Amanda, she's stalked by her, with each instance they'd bump into each other being a coincidence. Succumbing to the pressure created by Amanda, Fran vents her frustrations to Nell, who details that Amanda owns and runs an orphanage for children who had lost their parents. Appearing beside Nell, Amanda recites the word coincidence again, and Nell then informs her that Klimt wants to see her. In Klimt's office, Klimt offers Fran a choice of 2 crystals from his collection in exchange for accepting a quest involving a dungeon called the Spider's Nest. However, with Fran's haggling skills, she manages to squeeze 5 out of Klimt, much to his chagrin. Fran then learns from Klimt that the quest was imposed on her not only because of nasty rumors surrounding their relationship, but for her to complete a quest of her rank. Furthermore, if Fran completes the quest, she'll be granted access to the dungeon in Olmut. Just then, Amanda breaks down the door to Klimt's office, barges into the room, and openly declares she'll be accompanying Fran on it, and Klimt begrudgingly agrees. Afterward, Fran sits in her room, enjoying some curry that Teacher made for her, and they discuss what to expect with the spider's nest. Their conversation then shifts to the crystals given to them by Klimt, which 3 are D-ranked and 2 are C-ranked, all of which Teacher had never encountered before. Wasting no time, Teacher absorbs the crystals, causing his abilities to evolve and earn himself 45 EP. When Fran arrives at the designated location for her quest, she's embraced by Amanda. Then, the lead adventurer Cruz of Azure Guardians introduces himself and his teammates, Rig and Ezel, who will act as the arbiters of the Rank E, Rank Up quest. Cruz then asks that the other teams introduce themselves, and Crad of the Dragon's Roar goes first and gives Fran a disapproved look. Freon, Eyes of the Forest party leader, goes next, then Amanda, and finally Fran. Upon hearing Fran's name, Crad becomes contentious toward Fran, claiming she manipulated the GM to promote her quickly. He then recites the nasty rumors surrounding the GM and calls Amanda an old lady, prompting her to accost Crad and force him to apologize. Freed from Amanda's grasp, Crad still refuses to believe Fran didn't manipulate the GM to achieve her ranking, but Fran still denies it. Cruz's explanation about the quest continues about Amanda's role in it, a summary of the quest details, and the Spider's Nest dungeon where it takes place. They then press forward and Teacher mentions a tip from Garrus about how dungeon cores spawn crystals and monsters, which help guilds financially function. Also, as they venture to their destination, Crad tries to trip Fran and make her fall into a river, but she dodges it. In turn, he is disciplined by Amanda. These actions cause the whole group to be behind schedule. A camp is set up that night, and Fran is assigned to be first on watch duty. As she does, Crad, still doubtful of Fran, provokes her into dueling him by disparaging Teacher. Hence, Teacher suggests that Fran erect a wind and earth barrier to keep watch for monsters. Fran then casts Wind and Earth Zone, which astonishes Fran, before drawing Teacher. The two then duel, but Fran easily defeats Crad, but intrigues Amanda, who asks her to a friendly duel. Fran accepts on the condition that Amanda stops following her if she wins, and Amanda decides that if she wins, Fran will start calling her mommy. Determined not to lose, Fran informs the worried Teacher that she accepted the challenge to figure out how long she'd last against a ranked adventurer. However, Fran loses in the duel, but not without putting up a worthy challenge for Amanda, who allows Fran to not address her as mommy. The following day, Fran formally apologizes to Cruz for using her fire magic so close to the nearby woods during her battle against Amanda. Cruz downplays it and reveals that he, along with Crad's party, challenged Amanda as well, but confessed they didn't last as long against her. Eventually, the group reaches the spider's nest, and Cruz uses his guild card, granting passage into it. Walking into the dungeon, Teacher warns Fran to be on guard when she's in there. Inside the spider nest dungeon with the other adventurers, Fran and Teacher note their amazement at how impressive the place looked to them. Cruz then explains the BF1 layout and arranges the group into their respective positions. Amanda tells Fran about her history with the dungeon and how it inspired her to open an orphanage. Their conversation ends when trap spiders surround them, but are quickly disposed of by the adventurers as Fran stands by and watches with Amanda. Reaching BF2 of the dungeon, hornet monsters are dealt with there, and as they progress, Fran asks Amanda the difference between arts, skills, and magic. As Amanda explains, arts, more insect monsters attack the others, and Crad's power swing attack is used as an example of her explanation. On BF3 of the dungeon, Cruz warns the group that the floor is more booby trap-centric, which Crad's party unwittingly activates some on themselves. While the other adventurers active more traps, Amanda starts explaining to Fran about skills. During Amanda's explanation, Ezel uses his trap sense to assist him in disarming the traps to their path ahead. Said skill intrigues Fran, who's interested in it, and Teacher concurs, noting the resourcefulness of having it. Heading onward, Amanda continues her explanation concerning skills and talks about the different types of skills called unique and bonus. Amanda's explanation then gravitates over to magic as she explains the 4 main elements associated with it. She also details how each element can be learned through vigorous training associated with each element. At the doorway that led to BF4, a swarm of trap spiders blocked their way forward. Frian's team leads an attack against the monsters while Crad's party assists as a backup, and Amanda explains compound magic to Fran. Wood, ice, life, thunder, sand, and metal are elements of that magic. Thunder is the one that impressed Fran the most. Cruz decides for the group to take a break on BF4, and they all rest in a spacious room with fallen rubble and pillars. As a token of her appreciation, Fran gives Amanda a bowl of Teacher's curry. Once they finish their curry, Amanda discusses 2 other elements, light and shadow, followed by skills and abilities related to said magic. Crad then admits that their time in the dungeon thus far had been easy, but Cruz and Ezel respectively warn about the stronger monsters and traps awaiting them ahead. Fran then coaxes Teacher into learning lightning magic and has him max out his wind magic skills to unlock storm and thunder magic. The venture through BF5 is as treacherous as it's said to be, and their ultimate goal is to reach the dungeon's core, collect the crystals there, and leave. However, on BF6, a new variant of the trap spiders ambush the group, and Genel becomes afflicted with lethal poisoning. Hence Fran uses the healing magic, antidote on him. Fran's identify reveals the spider's name as Trick Spiders, and Gruz decides that everyone retreats back to BF5. With Fran and Amanda's assistance, they secure a way back to BF5. However, en route, Fran is knocked into a teleporter and force unequipped trap. This instance teleports Fran, Victor, and Baltz into another part of the dungeon without Teacher. Awakening in a room with Victor and Baltz, Fran notices a large monster there that's called a trickster spider. Back to Teacher, none of his skills can locate Fran, leaving him in a panic. Fran, Baltz, and Victor were all trapped in a room with a trickster spider. The remaining group discusses finding Fran's group and dealing with the trickster spider. Ultimately, Cruz teams up with Krad's group, Rig teams up with Freon's, and Amanda will proceed on her own with Teacher. At a safe distance, Amanda uses the wind magic noise collector to try and echolocate Fran's location. To her disappointment, Amanda could not find Fran and continues onward as Teacher worries for Fran's well-being. While Amanda uses noise collector again, Teacher uses split thinking to figure out a skill he could use to help find Fran's location. Teacher decides to use his summon minion skill and, following the system announcer's advice, summons an onyx wolf that immediately attacks him. Alerted by the mysteriously summoned onyx wolf's presence, Amanda readies her weapon, only for Teacher to telepathically communicate with her to stop. He then explains that he's a friend of Fran and that the wolf was there to locate her. Despite being confused by the situation, Amanda agrees to stand down as Teacher learns the wolf was under the influence of mana frenzy. Said ailment was caused by Teacher using excessive mana to summon the wolf, causing it to experience severe pain and recognize its summoner as a threat. Amanda then proposes that Teacher name the wolf as a possible way to tame it. Teacher names the wolf Jet, which not only tames it, but also evolves it into a shadow wolf. With Jet now obedient to his commands, Teacher has Jet get a whiff of Fran's scent so he can locate her. Once Jet picks up Fran's scent, he takes Teacher to her location as Amanda follows in pursuit. Fran, on the other hand, along with Victor and Baltz, were at the trickster spider's mercy and would be overwhelmed by some baby trick spiders. However, recalling Teacher's reassurance, Fran gets the courage to fight back by rescuing her two fellow captives from the baby spiders and uses her hands and legs to kill them. Switching over to Teacher's side, his group draws closer to Fran's location until they reach a dead end. Hence, Amanda casts Tornado Lance that destroys the dead-end wall, revealing a hidden pathway littered with spider webs and spiders. Teacher volunteers to go into the newly revealed passageway first. Meanwhile, Fran continues her skirmish against the Tricker Spider. Their fight is interrupted by Teacher, who casts Eternal Fire on himself and catapults himself through the Trickster Spider, thereby reuniting himself with Fran. Because the Trickster Spider had run away, Teacher casts Greater Heal and Antidote on Fran. Teacher and Fran have a bonding moment with each other, which is interrupted by Amanda. After Jet is formally introduced to Fran, Amanda personally asks Teacher why he's a talking sword, and with his permission, Fran discloses Teacher's secret to her. After the big revelation, Fran heals Victor and Baltz, who were both on the verge of death. Thankfully, the two had no recollection of Teacher's secret. Eventually, Fran's group was ambushed by a white owl, as the trick spider was shown to be still alive and fully recovered from the injuries it sustained from Teacher. Fran, Teacher, Amanda, Jet, Baltz, and Victor are confronted by a white owl monster as hordes of trick spiders ambush Cruz's side. Soon, Fran rode on Jet's back and was accompanied by Amanda, who had carried Baltz and Victor. While Baltz and Victor are reunited with Krad and Genel, Fran has Jet rescue the remaining adventurers trapped by the trick spider's webs. Both Fran and Amanda then respectively use fire and wind spells to eliminate the remaining spiders surrounding the area. The white owl monster turned out to be Rig's familiar Talua. Close by, the trickster spider is revealed to have been there, and Fran decides to attack it, but the spider uses its baby's webs to create a shield for itself. Rig then has Talua heal everyone with its magic. And with that, Cruz has Fran deal with the trickster spider while he and everyone else takes care of the trick spiders. Using Flare Burst, Fran destroys the trickster spider's shield web and rides on top of Jet with Teacher enchanted with Fire Papaya to slay the trickster spider. However, the trickster spider entraps her in a sphere comprised of trick spiders so that it can escape. In order to break out of their entrapment, Fran and Teacher duo cast Stun Bolt, allowing them to sequentially break free of their entrapment and stun the trickster spider. The trickster spider's retaliation causes Fran to become overwhelmed, triggering Amanda, who defeats it and destroys its crystal. Doing this upsets Fran, who had wanted to finish off the trickster spider herself, which makes Amanda disheartened by her actions. After locating a newfound passageway, the group located where the dungeon core and the crystals were and proceeded to collect them. That night, Fran asks Amanda if she has ever encountered anyone in the Black Cat tribe who has evolved, but she has not. She does recall a couple of black cats who wanted to evolve and vows to support Fran. Back to Klimt, the GM praises Fran for her recent accomplishments in the dungeon excavation. Because of them, Klimt allows Fran to explore the Ulmet mine and advises her to check her job classes too. Fran does so with Nell's assistance, and of the available new classes, she chooses Battle Mage. Afterward, Fran visits Garrus' workshop to pick up the armor she commissioned called the Cat Armor. Since the items in the armor set were named, they were thereby given a divine blessing by the beast gods. Although seemingly pleased with the armor set, Teacher has a snit with Garrus about how her abdomen area was exposed. However, Garrus' explanation clears things up with Teacher about the preferential tastes of cat kind, and demonstrates how even though exposed, it's protected thanks to the divine protection granted by the gods. It also turns out that Garrus was heading toward Ulmet as well, but instead of by sea like Fran and Teacher, he plans on going through the mountains. The following day, Fran is seen off by all of the friends that she made in Alessa, and, after she says her goodbyes to them all, rides off on Jet. Meanwhile, Rig is shown to be Klimt's nephew, who was tasked with investigating reports made with the Trick Spider dungeon that was said to be connected to August Ulsand. He hatched a plot to divert control of the dungeon from Alessa Rados. Rig was also tasked with spying on Fran to see if she was a spy for Rados, but that notion was dismissed after hearing Talua's report. Elsewhere, Fran rode on Jet to a destination unknown. Fran flies on Teacher while heading toward a flying island, only to be ambushed by an undead monster. The anime ends with Fran crashes in a house where a man calling himself Jean Duvix, a necromancer,